When we left off, Palmer was planning on sending Nipper with Dorothy on vacation. Alex thinks that Nipper's going to follow the car back home from the beach. What do you think? Before we get started, think about that. Chapter 36. Despite the heat, he slept with his window shut and locked and shade drawn. Still, he could hear them, Beans and Muddo, squalling like alley cats on the back porch roof. He could hear them raise the screen, knock on the window, work to open it. On the street, they tree stumped him. They planted themselves in front of him so that he had to step around them, only to find them replanted in his new path. It took him half an hour to walk 1 block. They mocked and taunted him. They flicked his ears and spit on his sneakers. Beans bared his green and yellow teeth and breathed baked beans into his face. It was as if he had never been one of them. "He's gone," he told them. They laughed. They didn't believe him. He had an idea. Invite them into his room. Let them see for themselves. Maybe then they would believe. Back off. But then he realized that his mother would never again allow them into her house. It then occurred to him that when he thought of the guys, he was really thinking only of 2 of them, Beans and Muddo, not Henry. Henry was one of them, all right, but he was different. Maybe he could sneak Henry into his room, prove it to Henry. The guys agreed. He did not want to have to convince Beans and Muddo that his mother was dangerous to them, especially in her house. And while it frustrated them that only Henry would have the privilege, they were too curious not to let it happen. Beans looked up at Henry. He tugged on Henry's red and white striped t-shirt until Henry bent down to Beans's height. "Check it out good. Don't let him trick ya." Henry nodded. "Report back to me." "Okay." Palmer chose a morning when his mother was out, while Beans and Muddo waited, sitting brazenly across the street on Dorothy's front steps. He led Henry into his house. Up in the room, he held out both arms and said, "It's all yours. Look all you want." While Henry looked about, poking obediently into the closet, Palmer studied Henry. Henry was so tall that the top of his head grazed the basketball net, and yet, somehow, he did not give an impression of bigness. On the contrary, he seemed quite small, smaller than Beans and Muddo, smaller even than Palmer. "Thanks for the warning," Palmer said to him. Henry, peering foolishly into the wastebasket, said, "What warning?" "On the cake." Henry paused and then said, "Oh, yeah." Palmer watched him search some more. "What's your real name?" Henry looked startled. His eyes went to the window, as if the guys might be lurking there. He never looked at Palmer. "Huh? I know Beans' real name is Arthur, and Muddo is Billy. Who are you, really?" Henry dropped to his knees and ducked under the bed. He stood back up. His wide, startled eyes, careful to avoid Palmer, swept across the walls. "George," he said, and left the room. He hurried down the stairs. Palmer called. "George, quit!" he called. "I saw you pulling your little sister in the wagon." But Henry, really George, was already out the door. What do you think Palmer meant by Henry quit? What's he want Henry to quit? Think about that before you listen to the next chapter. Chapter 37. Whatever Henry told them, they must have believed, for they backed off. If they came across Palmer in the street or at the park, they continued to harass him, but they stopped coming to his house. They did not go out of their way to find him, not that he cared. He tumbled lifelessly through July, feeling as dry and empty as the cicada husks on the trees. Down empty alleyways he rode his bike. He hardly ever saw Dorothy. They avoided each other. When they met accidentally on the street, they said hi and quickly turned in opposite directions. He threw away the shoebox that had served as both the soldiers' barracks and Nipper's roost. He kept the soldiers in his sock drawer. Sometimes he took them out to play. He arranged them on his desk, facing them to the enemy. Sometimes the enemy was large and formidable, such as a hippo slipper. Sometimes it was one pink, defenseless eraser. One day his father showed him the proper placement of the troops, how to space them out so that a landmine would never kill more than one, how to send flankers to the left and right, curling in a semicircle to hit the enemy from 3 sides and prevent him from sneaking behind you, how to keep a platoon in reserve. He learned where to place the green-faced lieutenant and the captain, and high ground being priceless, to set the machine gunner on a book, a children's dictionary. Usually it came to no more than this: a deployment of troops, 27 soldiers leaning, 27 tiny olive green rifles aiming, poised on the brink of battle. And then one day they attacked. They moved forward. They bore down on the eraser from 3 sides, cutting off all retreat, pinning it down in murderous gunfire. Crossfire. The lieutenant leading the charge, the captain shouting commands, calling in airstrikes. Yet somehow the wicked eraser managed to stay alive, managed even to crawl to the front lines, only to be greeted by the backup platoon. Amazingly, it survived this as well and was up and running and thought itself home free, until the eraser was cut to ribbons. The next day, he buried the soldiers in the backyard. The tiny green faces said nothing. The tiny green eyes stared up at him as the dirt fell upon them. He continued to read Beetle Bailey and to cut out the strips, but he no longer mounted them in his collection. Then he stopped cutting them out. Then he stopped reading. He never touched the Nerf ball. The net hung unswished. He still kept his door closed, but sometimes he kept it open too. He went with his father to a Titans baseball game in the Twilight Semi-Pro League. They drove to Denville. It was good to go to another town, but not very good. He ate a hot dog and relish and a soft pretzel with mustard and a birch beer. The birch beer was red. The uniforms of the Titans were orange. The shirts were orange and the socks and the T on the cap. A black and orange stripe went from the belt to the top of the stirrup sock. The catcher's chest protector was orange, and so were the shortstop's shoelaces. In the 4th inning, there was a home run, then another, a greater one. The ball flew high above the cheering crowd into the twilight sky over the billboarded fence. It landed in dirt beyond the center fielder's leap and rolled onto the parking lot, a white pureness against the black macadam. Suddenly kids were racing, a flock of boys bending themselves around parked cars, colliding at the rolling ball. When they separated, one hand was raised. In the last inning there was a foul ball, though at first Palmer did not know it. He was reading the billboards when suddenly the people around him were leaping from their seats. Someone was shouting, "Look out!" A shadow fell over him. Turning, he heard the sound inches from his face, something like a slap, then laughter. His father's voice saying, "Gotcha!" His father's body standing, leaning over him, blotting out the entire field and sky. Then the light came back and someone was saying, "Look at his face!" And his father was smiling and looking down, and his hands were opening like a flower. On the ride home, Palmer held the foul ball in his own hands. He imagined he felt a heartbeat. It was as if he could smell into the future. The gray, sour odor of gun smoke came to him a full week before Family Fest was due to begin. There were shots, too, the popping of cap pistols from 4- and 5-year-olds practicing to one day be ringers and shooters. All things in their gun sights became pigeons, grasshoppers, mailboxes, yellow squash, each other. The sun dazzled in a cloudless sky. The sidewalks, if you took your shoes off, burned. After dinner, people watered flowers. At night, he heard trucks rumbling. Little kids on pastel bikes pedaled furiously, churning the heat to butter, gasping stories of wooden crates piled higher than skyscrapers, of crates broken into, pigeons flushed and killed, security guards posted. Men on porches cleaned their shotguns, women baked pies. In the morning, he thought he felt a nip on his ear. He opened his eyes and looked about, but he was all alone. At first, Palmer believed he had released Nipper for Nipper's sake. Then he began to see that it had been for his own sake as well. He knew this from the relief he felt from sleeping with the window open, of no longer fearing the yellow cat. The tension that had choked him for months was gone. The price of peace had been high, expelling himself from the gang, proclaiming himself a traitor, banishing his beloved pet. For such a price, a peace should be excellent. Yet, when Palmer reached for it, tried to taste it, it was not there. Instead, he found only his blizzard-blown friend, images and memories and dreams. One night, he dreamed about a pigeon crossing a road in a faraway place. A car zoomed by, knocking the pigeon down. Other cars zoomed, and soon the pigeon was meat and feathers, flat. Then an old woman with the watering can began to sprinkle the road, and the meat plumped up and came together again with the feathers, and the old woman took the reconstituted pigeon in her hands. Only now it wasn't an old woman, it was a kid, a ringer, throttling the pigeon by the neck, and the pigeon had a beak that was soft like lips, and the pigeon was speaking. How do you think Palmer, is he regretting his decision to send Nipper away? Or do you think he still thinks it was a good idea? He's kind of acting depressed. What does that mean? He's kind of gloomy and sad. And think about his friendships. The guys, they're not his friends anymore. Were they really good friends to begin with? He doesn't really talk to Dorothy much either. He's kind of all alone now, feeling sad that he let Nipper go. Throughout the days and nights of Family Fest, he stayed close to his parents. He did the fun house with his father and tilt-a-whirl with his mother. Several times in the noise and jostle, he thought he heard Bean's voice. At the bake sale, he had never seen so many pies at once. More pies on the endless table than soldiers buried in his backyard. His mother let him pick out his favorite. He chose raspberry crumb. During the week, his father said many things, mostly with his hands. He rubbed Palmer's hair and squeezed his shoulder and tugged on his shirt and tickled his ribs and pulled him backward with a finger hooked in the back pocket of his jeans and lightly brushed the side of his neck with his fingertips as he stopped and chatted with friends. Each of these things had a different meaning to Palmer, and yet the same, a language unlearned of words unheard that came to roost at some warm and waiting perch far beyond his ears. He could not remember the last time his father called him Big Guy. In other years, his father had always stopped at the shooting gallery, where flat yellow ducks cruised smugly until shot in the eye. Pop, ping, pop, ping. This year they walked by, not even looking. Palmer tried not to hear, but even as he bobbed on a merry-go-rounding horse, as he breathed deeply the sweet, crispy tangle of the funnel cake, there it was. Pop, ping. On Friday, he rode his bike to the old train station. He heard them before he saw them, a noise like turkeys. He pulled up in front of the crates. The top crates towered high above him, and the whole slatted, gobbling tenement occupied more space than the boarded-up station. In the shade of the old ticket window, a man sat whittling a stick. "Better not stand there too long," the man called, laughing. "Smell'll knock you over." Palmer stayed a long while, his eyes closed, listening, trying to feel. On Friday night, the shooting gallery was mobbed, and at home, the golden bird was gone from the mantel. Why do you think the golden bird is gone from the mantel? What do you think's gonna happen? Pigeon Day is tomorrow. And he's already said he's not going to be a ringer. Do you think he'll go? Do you think he'll watch? We'll finish up tomorrow. See how it ends.